Emperor Nero, infamous for his excesses and cruelties, is shown here in a more contemplative mood, writing poetry while an imperial servant fans him. But what else did he do during his long days? He drove his people hard, pushing them to meet impossible expectations. Could you survive under such pressure? Imagine you're a Roman tenant farmer, working land owned by a wealthy landlord. You wake before dawn to the sound of a whip-poor will and the smell of wood smoke curling from your neighbor's chimney. Your wife has already risen and is preparing breakfast, her thin tunic barely hiding the swell of her belly. She gives you a quick smile and a bowl of watery porridge. It's not much, but it will sustain you, you hope, until midday when your work is done. You step out into the hot sun and clasp the worn leather straps of your ox goad, a sharp piece of wood with a metal point at its end. Your job is simple. Drive your oxen and plow the endless furrows of your landlord's fields. If you break a plow, you pay for it yourself. If the oxen stumble, fall, or die, you too will be severely punished. As the sun climbs higher, you crack the whip, coaxing your oxen forward. You bite back a curse. This unforgiving land seems determined to resist you, just as it did your father before you, just as it will your sons after you. Even the gods, it seems, have turned their backs. There is no rain to loosen the hard soil, no wind to cool your burning skin. Still, you must push on. You think of the lash that awaits if you don't finish your work on time. The thought spurs you on like a second whip. But it doesn't matter how fast you work, how many fields you clear. Your landlord expects more. He's a new type of master, lean and hard and watchful. His name is Marcus Licinius Crassus. He squeezes every last drop of profit from his land. He demands more work and more speed and more obedience. Lately, he's been talking about draining the nearby lake to add its waters to the Tiber River. That way, he says, he can irrigate even more of his fields and grow even more grain. You've heard rumors that he plans to sell his grain to the emperor himself. You shudder to think of it. The emperor's armies are currently engaged in a brutal campaign against the Jewish people to the east. What business does he have with so much grain? Just then, one of the oxen collapses, collapsing onto the hard ground. You hurry to its side. Its tongue lolls out, its eyes glaze over. It's too exhausted to continue. There's only one thing to do. With a heavy heart, you take out your knife and cut the animal's throat. Now, without warning, a chilling voice cuts through the afternoon heat. So you've stopped working, have you? Do you think I won't notice? Or do you think my agents are blind? Hand over your worthless animal. I can still make use of it. You turn around to see Marcus striding toward you with two of his agents flanking him. He looks like a hawk ready to tear its prey to pieces. There is no reasoning with a man like this. You hand over the carcass silently, hating the trembling in your own hands. When it's over, you go home to the small house where your wife awaits. You share your meager dinner with her and talk quietly of escape. Maybe there's work to be had in the city. Anything's better than this. As you leave the farmlands and head into the sprawling metropolis of Rome, you find yourself amidst the bustling crowd, jostled by beggars and soldiers, merchants and prostitutes. Amidst this sea of humanity, you spot a familiar face. It's your old friend Titus, recently discharged from the army. But why is he staring so intently at the emperor's palace? What has caught his attention? Perhaps a bit of gossip. You ask a passing woman, and she leans close, whispering about the emperor's latest fancies and how his beautiful wife, Poppaea Sabina, has suddenly died under mysterious circumstances. Is it an accident, murder, or suicide? People shake their heads. It doesn't matter. The Great One is looking for a new wife. If you want to be noticed, you need to get to the palace first. Titus is clearly hoping for a prestigious appointment. How could this affect you? You wonder. You and Titus were once fellow soldiers. You remember the day the 9th Legion disappeared. It was your job to guard the supply wagons. Titus was your best friend, and the two of you spent your downtime discussing philosophy and arguing over poetry. You can still remember the haunted look on his face when the Legion was called away to fight in far-off Britain. Before they left, he told you, I fear we may never return, my friend. But if I do come back, I swear I'll buy you a drink. A big one with lots of vinegar. And you laughed because that was Titus, always trying to be cheerful. But the Legion of the Eagle never came back. They were lost to time, consumed by the fog of war, swallowed up by the mists of history. Some said they'd been wiped out by a surprise attack. Others claimed they'd simply vanished without a trace. No written records remained, leaving behind only questions that echoed through the ages. You and Titus were discharged as heroes. You received a noble pension and a lifetime stipend, enough to live comfortably in retirement. But those who hadn't lost friends or family in the disaster weren't so lucky. They had nothing to show for their service, no medals, no monuments, no stories. They were forgotten. All except for Titus, who still wears his armor, still marches to war drums, and still carries his shield. He's chasing ghosts in the halls of power. You reach out to touch his shoulder, but he flinches away from your touch, as though you have burned him. He is gone, and you are alone again. Meet the conquering heroes. They return home to cheers and celebrations, welcomed as liberators, their names sung in triumphal hymns, their images emblazoned on coins. Their statues adorn public squares, monuments erected to commemorate their victories. They ride in chariots, their armor glinting in the sun. They are untouchable, revered, supreme. They are the most powerful men in the empire. But how did Rome conquer so much? Who fought the barbarians beyond the Tiber? Whose labor built those grand monuments? What were the costs that we don't see on the coins or read about in the histories? The empire was built on backs like this one, on bodies bent under the weight of Roman ambition. And just as slavery is integral to Rome's rise, so too is the silent suffering of its tenant farmers. So today we'll talk about why it sucked to be a Roman tenant farmer. Imagine waking up to the sound of a crow, not in a warm bed, but on a pile of straw in a dim, damp one-room hut made of mud, brick, and thatch. The air is cool, but heavy with the scent of livestock, stale bread, and last night's ashes. Outside, the fields stretch endlessly, and the day ahead is already decided, a rhythm of toil, hunger, and obligation. You are a colonist, a tenant farmer in the vast Roman countryside. Not a slave, no, but not truly free either. You work someone else's land, answer to someone else's rules, and most of what you grow, you do not get to keep. Your work begins before the sun rises and often ends well after it sets. The soil is stony, not kind to your aching back or bare feet. You plant barley, wheat, maybe chickpeas if the season allows. Tools are simple: a wooden plow, an iron hoe, your own hands. The oxen, when you have them, move slowly, often stubborn. There is no such thing as a weekend. The Roman calendar is dotted with feast days for the wealthy. For you, there's no difference between Mars Day or Saturn's. Only weather can grant you pause. And even then, it's never a gift. You kneel to pull weeds. You lift stones from the furrows. You carry water in heavy amphorae from a nearby stream, unless the stream has dried or flooded or been poisoned by runoff upstream. Your fingernails stay cracked, your skin dry and leathered by the sun. At midday, you may chew a crust of coarse black bread, the kind made from leftover flour, often mixed with bean husks and barley. No wine, just thin gruel or sour goat's milk if you're lucky. And you eat quickly, always near the field, so no daylight is wasted. Debt and dread. You do not own your land. It belongs to a latifundium, a sprawling estate owned by a senator or a merchant or a veteran rewarded by the state. You lease the soil, the seed, sometimes the very tools in your hands. Each harvest, you owe a portion back. A share so high you're left with barely enough to feed your family. If the rains fail, or the pests arrive, or the market crashes in faraway Rome, you are still expected to pay. Fall short, and your name might be added to a list, a quiet, parchment death sentence that leads to confiscation, forced labor, or worse. Your children sold to cover your debts. The laws protect the landowner, not you. Even in failure, You owe loyalty to the system that breaks you. Some tenant farmers flee. Most do not. There's nowhere to run. The empire is built on the backs of people like you. In the provinces, a small minority of tenant farmers owned their farms. They were the felices, the lucky ones. But the majority of rural Romans were bound to the land in a brutal cycle of debt and drudgery. They were the colonists, the tenants who scratched out a living on someone else's property, working for next to nothing, surviving on scraps, raising families in huts and hoping for good weather. The colonists had little in common with the image of the classical Roman peasant, the small farmer who lived in a village, tilled his own soil, and fed his family with the produce of his labor. The picture was idyllic, a staple of Roman art and literature, going all the way back to Virgil's Georgics. But while Italy was covered with farms like this was more of the norm. The reality of rural life was more like this. In this period, a few small farms existed side by side with giant estates that sprawled over the landscape, gobbling up soil and serfs alike. These latifundia were plantations in the modern sense of the word, vast tracts of land devoted to a single crop. Latifundia also housed herds of animals, flocks of sheep, orchards laden with olives or figs, vineyards heavy with grapes. The complexity of these operations required hired labor. And so throughout Italy and the provinces, a new class of tenant farmer appeared, the colony. Colony were not slaves, at least not in the common understanding of the term. They weren't chattel. They couldn't be bought and sold. They didn't live in chains, and they certainly didn't have masters who whipped them for falling behind on quotas. Instead, the colonist was a free person legally and technically, though in practice, he or she had no real freedom. His lord could be a senator, someone with political ambitions, so he farmed his estates through managers, getting rich off the production of grain, olives, or wine. Or he might be a merchant, like Marcus Coccius Nerva, who turned his provincial holdings into a money-making machine, growing grain in Egypt and shipping it across the Mediterranean. Or he could be a soldier. Many veterans received land grants for their service, but these farms weren't easy to manage from afar, so landlords hired tenants to run them for them. In exchange for the use of the land, the colonist paid rent in money or in kind, delivering a percentage of his crops to the owner. But the arrangement was rigged against the tenant. The share demanded by the landlord was almost always higher than the amount that could reasonably be expected from the land. The result was debt. Colonists fell deeper and deeper into debt, generation after generation, shackled to the land that they could never own. And then there were the middlemen. Landlords typically hired administrators, procuratores, to oversee the properties, collect rents, and ensure that everything ran smoothly. They would hire overseers to whip the laborers into shape, overseers who would punish the slow or the lazy with fines or beatings. And they would employ agents to track down runaways, to seize their property and force them to return. If the colonists tried to fight back, they had no recourse. They couldn't take their landlords to court. If they did win, the legal costs would ruin them. The odds were stacked against them. Throughout Italy, tenant farmers banded together in associations, trying to bargain collectively for better treatment. But time and again, their efforts failed. When push came to shove, the colonist was considered a disposable resource, less valuable than the animals that grazed on his fields or the tools that lay idle in the granary. As for the colonist's wife, she was especially vulnerable, subject to sexual exploitation by landowners, overseers, and anyone else who thought himself powerful enough to take what he wanted. Many tenant farmers simply ran away, leaving behind the dead weight of family, tradition, and obligation. But where could they go? Back to the city, perhaps, to become urban laborers, joining the swelling ranks of the unemployed, competing for scarce jobs, earning just enough to survive. Archaeology tells us a great deal about the lives of tenant farmers. On a site in central Greece, excavations uncovered a small house with 4 rooms, a courtyard, and a well. Pottery lay shattered on the floor. Skeletons lay buried underneath. Archaeologists determined that the building had been used as a farmhouse. Based on the dating, the settlement probably began around the time that Rome conquered Greece. By the end of the 2nd century BC, the population had grown to around 300 people. But by the 1st century AD, the settlement had been abandoned. It wasn't destroyed by fire or earthquake or invaders. The people simply picked up and left, looking for somewhere, anywhere else to go. What can we learn from the story of the colonists? How does it shed light on the fall of the Roman Empire? What insights does it offer into the nature of empire itself? People have been asking these questions for a long time, which is one reason that our channel exists. We believe that ancient history matters because it tells us something about ourselves. We hope that you find our videos thought-provoking and educational and entertaining. But we couldn't do it without the support of our patrons. Become a patron today and join our community. Learn more by clicking the link below. Caligula, a figure synonymous with tyranny, excess, and decadence, stands as one of the most infamous emperors in ancient Rome's history. But what made him so evil? Join me as we delve into the life of Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, better known as Caligula, and explore the factors that shaped him into the monster we know today. Caligula's story began in a world far removed from the opulence and privilege he would later embrace. Born on August 12 in the year 12, he was the son of Germanicus Julius Caesar, a respected member of the Julio-Claudian dynasty and grandson of the deified Emperor Augustus. His early years were marked by a turbulent mix of family drama, political turmoil, and even exile, all of which left an indelible mark on his psyche. One of the defining characteristics of Caligula's reign was his extravagant and self-indulgent lifestyle. From the time he ascended to power, he immersed himself in luxury, throwing lavish parties, acquiring vast wealth, and surrounding himself with beautiful women. This indulgence went to such extremes that it became notorious throughout the empire. Caligula's insatiable appetite for pleasure had a devastating impact on Rome's financial stability. He lavished gold on his companions and mistresses, spent exorbitant amounts on artworks and chariots, and embarked on ambitious building projects that strained the imperial treasury. However, beneath this veneer of debauchery, a darker side of Caligula emerged, revealing a ruthless and tyrannical ruler. He developed a reputation for extreme cruelty, often resorting to torture and murder to eliminate his enemies. This vicious streak extended to his own family members, including his own grandmother, Julia Maesa, and his own sister, Drusilla. Despite being related to some of the most influential and respected figures in Roman history, Caligula's actions painted him as a monster, incapable of empathy or remorse. One of the most disturbing aspects of Caligula's reign was his infamous debauchery. He hosted orgies inviting 4 men of only one type, bald, short, or fat. He chained women to chariots like horses and whipped them as they pulled him around. He dressed as a woman and prostituted himself in taverns and brothels. It seemed that nothing was too vile or degrading for him to try. These scandalous escapades not only shocked the Roman populace, but also tarnished the image of the imperial family. Caligula's erratic behavior and decision-making were another testament to his instability. He appointed individuals to influential positions based on their ability to satisfy his sexual desires rather than their competence or loyalty. For example, he made his freed slave, Narcissus, a senator, and bestowed upon him the responsibility of managing his household affairs. Furthermore, he displayed a lack of strategic vision, vacillating between reckless abandon and bouts of melancholy that left his advisors and courtiers baffled. The turning point in Caligula's reign, and indeed his life, came after his wife, Milvia Caesonia, bore him a daughter in 37. Some sources suggest that the birth triggered a mental breakdown in the emperor, leading to a drastic personality change, while others argue that this event merely exacerbated pre-existing psychological issues. Whatever the truth, the postpartum phase of Caligula's rule marked a descent into madness and tyranny. His first act of violence was the murder of his grandmother, Julia Mesa, whom he accused of plotting against him. He then turned on his sister Drusilla, ending her life out of jealousy and possessiveness. These acts shocked the Roman elite and signaled a new and sinister chapter in Caligula's life. But it was his treatment of his own mother, Agrippina the Younger, that truly revealed the depths of his depravity. After the death of his father, Germanicus, Agrippina devoted herself to ensuring her son's rise to power, maneuvering through the complexities of Roman politics to secure his position as the next emperor. However, once Caligula ascended to the throne, he repaid his mother's devotion with betrayal and cruelty. He stripped her of power, insulted her dignity, and ultimately orchestrated her exile. Caligula's bizarre and cruel behavior extended beyond his family. He delighted in humiliating and tormenting his courtiers and advisors, subjecting them to public mockery and humiliation. He hosted feasts inviting 8 men of only one type, bald, short, or fat, and chained women to chariots like horses, whipping them as they pulled him around. His sadistic tendencies knew no bounds. In addition to his cruelty towards individuals, Caligula displayed a callous disregard for the welfare of the Roman populace. He imposed heavy taxes, disregarded their pleas for relief, and spent lavishly on his own pleasures while the common folk suffered. His indifference to their plight created a deep chasm between the imperial family and the people they were supposed to serve. Perhaps the most tragic aspect of Caligula's reign was the disillusionment and despair it caused among the Roman elite. Many senators and courtiers who had once supported and admired him, like the philosopher and statesman Thrasea Paetus, grew to despise him. They grappled with the moral implications of serving such a depraved ruler, torn between their duty and their conscience. Their disillusionment highlighted the tragic downfall of a once promising young emperor. The end of Caligula's reign was swift and brutal. In 41, he was assassinated by his own grandmother, Julia Mesa, and her lover, Cassius Chaerea, a Praetorian guard. His untimely demise brought an abrupt end to his reign of terror, but not before leaving an indelible scar on the psyche of ancient Rome. So why was Caligula so evil? It seems that his behavior stemmed from a toxic mix of factors. His privileged upbringing shielded him from the harsh realities of life outside the imperial court. His immense power provided him with the means and audacity to indulge his every whim. And perhaps most tragically, his mental instability, whether inherited or acquired, drove him to commit unspeakable acts. As we reflect on the life and times of Caligula, we are confronted with a cautionary tale, a reminder of the corrosive effects of unchecked power, the dangers of a life devoid of empathy, and the tragedy of a mind lost to darkness. His story serves as a timeless lesson in the complexities of human nature and the perils of absolute power. His mother was dead. The advisor was gone. Now, the emperor was all alone, and so the Great Fire began. It started in the heart of Rome, quickly fanned by winds of neglect and malice. Nero watched from his palace as flames devoured the city. He made no effort to stop it. Instead, he prowled the colonnades like a restless ghost, pacing the marble halls of his gilded cage. He would later claim to have fought against the blaze, but the truth was more complex. He had built his own private army to guard his palace. They had turned away those trying to save their homes. Then he had opened the gates, letting the fire rage free. He stood apart, watching, detached, amused. When the fire finally subsided, only 1/8 of Rome was still standing. People wandered through the ashes, searching for lost loved ones. Others searched for someone to blame. Fingers pointed at Christians, who some said had started the fire with sulfur. Nero needed a villain, and so he found the Christians. The persecution began subtly. Christians were banned from the city, then from the empire. They were tortured, murdered, thrown to wild beasts. But the cruelty wasn't about them. It was about showing off. Nero wanted the world to see what he could do. He reveled in fear. Soon he took to the streets again, not to watch his city burn, but to see its ruins rebuilt. Towers rose, roads were paved, houses appeared from the ash, but they weren't the same. This new Rome was sterile, empty, and hollowed out from within. Like an artist might mold clay, Nero molded his city. He designed buildings, planted parks, planned avenues. He didn't care how, why, or who. He simply demanded it be done, but something was missing. The soul of Rome had been lost in the fire. Nero felt it too. Beneath the gold and marble, his heart grew cold. Even Rome's greatest spectacles couldn't warm it. The gladiator games thrilled him. So he brought back the condemned, chained men who fought to the death, their blood painting the sand red. But the cheers of the crowds meant nothing to him. And so Nero sought different diversions. Enter Pythagoras. A former slave, now freed, Pythagoras was a singer, dancer, and actor. He performed for Nero's amusement, offering him laughter where there was none. And then he did something more. Pythagoras entered the emperor's bed. The two began a relationship, and Nero was smitten. For a while, it seemed he might actually smile again. A flawed reflection. One day, Nero wanted to see himself reflected in a mirror, but the polished bronze offered no image. The emperor angrily ordered it removed. That evening, Pythagoras looked into the darkened palace hall and saw not the handsome, laughing youth he had once known. Instead, he saw a monster, but the monster had followers. There was Acte, a former slave girl, now the emperor's mistress. She lived openly in Nero's chambers, a constant reminder of his decadence. Then there was Tigellinus, Nero's freed man, now his military commander. He spied on senators, crushed rebellions, and sated Nero's appetite for cruelty. Around them all, loyal courtiers bowed and scraped, eager to advance themselves. They were Nero's courtiers, his yes-men, his enablers. And when they gathered, plots formed, poisons brewed, and daggers were sharpened. Each believed he or she was indispensable to the emperor. Each believed they could serve Nero better than anyone else. But only one mattered to Nero, Pythagoras. He was the closest thing to family Nero had ever known. He was trusted, relied upon, almost revered. One day, Pythagoras visited the baths of Nero. The emperor lay upon a golden couch, bored and irritated. Pythagoras offered him a book. Nero read, then tossed it aside. The book fell open to a passage. The hero was dying. The crowd was hushed. All eyes were on Nero. What should the hero do? He should kill his enemies, the book said, or live in fear for the rest of his life. The choice was clear. That night, the plotters met in the gardens. Senators and freed men, mistresses and generals, swords flashed beneath the moonlight. As dawn approached, the bodies lay strewn across the marble. Only Pythagoras remained. He knelt beside the slain, tears streaming down his face. He heard Nero's footsteps approaching. "Who allowed this?" Nero asked, his voice shaking. Pythagoras knew he was next, and so he confessed everything. He showed Nero the dagger he had used. Then he waited for the blow. But Nero couldn't bring himself to strike. Instead, he cradled Pythagoras in his arms. The monster was gone. But ultimately, duty won over devotion. Nero sealed Pythagoras in a golden coffin, praising his memory. Then he returned to the gardens. As the sun set over Rome, he walked among the corpses, collecting their heads. He had them placed beside Pythagoras. Was this love? Was this madness? Who can say? But history remembers these lovers, not for their devotion, but for their demise. Nero ruled alone after that, shunning company, embracing solitude. The great palace felt even emptier. The emperor walked its echoing halls like a ghost. The arts he'd once loved now mocked him. The crowds jeered his name. The fire hadn't hurt Rome as much as he had. Nero was the great fire. He had consumed everything. He had lost his purpose, his meaning, and finally, his mind. Demise of an emperor. The end came quickly for Nero. On the Palatine Hill, surrounded by loyal troops, he heard the cries of the people. "Nero, the monster! Nero, the murderer!" They wanted him dead. He knew they would tear him apart. So he offered his sword to a soldier, his lips pressed together, hiding the tremor in his voice. The soldier hesitated. Nero pressed the blade against his chest. The soldier struck, but Nero had been expecting this. As he stumbled backward, he clutched a bowl of vinegar. It spilled over his wound. The soldier gasped, but it was too late. Nero sank to the ground. His head lolled to one side. He turned to the soldier, his last coherent thought. "What are you waiting for? Strike again. Don't you know I'm an emperor?" The soldier obliged, delivering another blow. He cut off Nero's head and held it aloft. The crowd cheered, sensing victory, unaware of what had been sown, the seeds of tyranny. Nero was no more, but his rule hung like a shroud over Rome, suffocating it, poisoning it, killing it. The empire would survive. It always does. But its soul would never recover. Its scars would last centuries, and the whispers of its people would echo long after the fall of Nero. Rome had known greatness. It had known peace. But now it was left with the bitter aftertaste of tyranny, with the chill memory of a winter's night, and the haunting question, how could an empire fall so low? How could a gilded palace bear such darkness? The answer perhaps lies in the nature of power, in the corrosive nature of absolute rule, and in the cautionary tale of Nero, the emperor who perished not by the sword or the spear, but by the poison of his own design. Do you think Nero was born evil, or did his environment make him that way? You decide in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you next time. Meet the most craziest, weirdest Roman emperor you have never heard about. After his mother's demise, Nero seized the reins of the empire at age 17. At first he was a puppet, but soon enough, the artist emperor, now truly in control, gave in to his deepest desires. He loved theater, music, sport, and spectacle. He performed on stage. It was unheard of for an emperor. He sang before crowded theaters. Chariots were his passion. He raced them like a commoner. He hosted enormous games in his own honor. The people were amused. The Senate was scandalized, but Nero no longer cared for their opinion. His personal life became just as chaotic. His wife, Octavia, was faithful and loyal, but Nero found her unattractive. He divorced her and had her executed. His next wife, Poppaea Sabina, died mysteriously after a kick of Nero's foot. Some sources claim that he kicked her to death in a fit of rage. Now desperate to find a new wife, Nero set his eyes on Pythagoras, a freedman, former slave, and now an influential courtier. And then he married a very young boy named Sporus, whom he had castrated to resemble Poppaea. The palace, once a place of policy and power, had turned into a theater of drama. Then, in 64 AD, Rome burned. For 9 days, flames devoured the heart of the eternal city. Temples, homes, markets turned to ash. Thousands were left homeless, countless dead. Most accounts agree on one thing: Nero wasn't helpful during the crisis. Instead of giving orders, he watched from a distance. Some sources say he arranged for public shelters and opened the imperial gardens to the homeless. But rumors took hold. Some said he had started the fire himself to make room for his grand new palace. Others claimed he stood on a rooftop fiddling the lyre as the city burned. History cannot confirm it, but the image stuck. To shift the blame, Nero accused the Christians, a new, obscure sect. Many were arrested. Some were burned alive, others crucified. It was one of the first organized persecutions of Christians in Roman history. And in the center of the destruction, Nero built his Domus Aurea, the Golden House, a vast, shimmering palace with a rotating dining room, artificial lakes, miles of frescoes and marble. To the people, it was a cruel joke. To Nero, it was the future. But the emperor's madness was pushing Rome toward ruin. In his final years, Nero grew paranoid. He executed rivals. He silenced dissent. Even Seneca, his old tutor, was forced to take his own life. His grip on power loosened with each new outburst. In 68 AD, rebellion finally came. In Gaul, in Spain, even within the Praetorian Guard. The Senate declared him a public enemy. Nero fled Rome in disguise. According to one account, he was barefoot, weeping, hiding in a friend's villa. There, surrounded by his loyal few, he prepared to die. A freedman helped him drive a blade into his own throat. His last words were whispered. Qualis artifex pareo, what an artist dies in me. He was 30 years old. With Nero's death, the Julio-Claudian dynasty ended. Civil war erupted. Rome would see 4 emperors in one chaotic year. And yet, Nero's memory lingered. Some still loved him for his games, for his charm, for his music. Years later, imposters would rise, claiming to be Nero returned. His name became legend, then insult, then myth. So what do you think? Let me know in the comment section below, and thanks for watching. In the beginning, Rome came to Britain to conquer, imposing garrisons upon the tribes and executing rebel chieftains. In the 2nd century CE, the process had mostly turned to administration. From the province of Britannia, Rome extracted wealth and manpower. Local rulers were converted to clients of Rome. Tribal names were gradually replaced with Roman ones. Local cults were absorbed into state religion. By the time of Hadrian, the emperor sought to define, control, and tame the unruly edges of the empire. One of those edges was here in this place. Here in the northwest corner of the island, a place whose very name sounded alien to Romans, a place called Caledonia. We know about Caledonia today as Scotland. Most of this part of Britain has been thoroughly explored. Archaeologists have uncovered brocks, hill forts, and settlements of the indigenous tribes. They have found temples and shrines associated with local cults. Over time, as the island was brought under Roman sway, some of these sites fell silent and others began to change. For example, in the region of modern-day Inverness, archaeologists have uncovered 2 substantial hill forts, each overlooking a great expanse of the surrounding land. Both date back to the Iron Age. One, called Craig Fadric, dates to around the 1st century BCE. The other, smaller site, known as the Iron Age Fort at Dunacoila, dates to the 1st century CE, the exact period when Roman influence was growing in the south. But as Romans advanced northward, the people living here either fled or abandoned their settlements. They moved away from the defensible crags and left the ramparts empty. This area was never fully Romanized. Even the name remained, mutated slightly into Caledonia. But elsewhere in Britain, the Romanization process worked more smoothly. People and places took on new names and faces. Roman coins, pottery, and buildings appeared. New roads were engineered and followed closely the traces of old tracks. Towns grew along river valleys. The farthest north any Romans pushed was just shy of Aberdeen, where they encountered a river called the Dee, which they named the Tiberus, hoping perhaps it would remind them of Rome. This incursion into northern Britain happened sometime in the late 1st century or early 2nd century CE. It was certainly before the year 78, since we know that the governor of Britannia, Gnaeus Julius Agricola, claimed Caledonia as a part of his province that year. But we don't know much about it. Agricola himself did not mention subduing Caledonia in his memoirs. He wrote glowingly of pushing into northern Britain, but he didn't mention the specifics of that campaign. All we know about this foray into Caledonia comes from his son-in-law, Pliny the Younger, who described his father-in-law's conquest of Caledonia, claiming that he reached the farthest northern reaches of the island. But even Pliny doesn't tell us how Agricola got there. We don't know if he forced his way in with the legions or if he intimidated the local leaders into submission, or perhaps both. The first solid evidence of Rome's presence in Caledonia comes from shortly after Agricola's governorship. The next governor, a man named Salvidianus Orfitus, dedicated a temple to Minerva, the goddess of wisdom. That temple stood at the modern site of the Firth of Clyde and overlooked the Irish Sea. He also built a road from the nearest settled areas of southern Scotland all the way to the temple. Perhaps Orfitus hoped to push farther north, but he faced financial problems. Britannia was an expensive province to govern. Rebellions periodically broke out, and maintaining order required troops. Nonetheless, in the middle of the 2nd century, another Roman leader named Gnaeus Julius Frontinus, no relation to Agricola, came to Britannia. He was the governor from 74 to 78. During his tenure, he repaired roads, built aqueducts, and made forts. He was in charge when the 9th Legion was stationed in York, and he probably knew that they were there. We also know that he held a festival in the city of Deva Victrix, now Chester, to celebrate his own victories against the northern tribes. That victory must have come at least in part thanks to the 9th Legion. The problem is that after the year 78, the 9th disappeared in the records. They are not mentioned again. They left no trace, no writing stone, no sculpture, no poem. They left no monuments, no statues, no obvious marks. The only remaining clues are the things they brought with them. Places that had been called by Gaelic names took on Latin versions, as is the case with the famous Antonine Wall, which historians think replaced the 9th after they vanished. This wall was named after Antoninus, the emperor at the time, and was built by local tribes, probably recruited and paid for by the 9th. But why they did so remains a mystery. Throughout the Roman Empire, the auxiliary forces that supported the legions consisted of non-citizens. These soldiers were usually drawn from conquered territories or client states. In Britannia, these auxiliaries came from among the local tribes. For example, we know that a group of Gauls from the Belgian tribe, the Menapii, were serving in the 9th Legion in the late 1st century. This detail comes from a single inscription on a funerary altar found in Nijmegen in the Netherlands. The altar was erected by fellow soldiers of a man named Lucius Pomponius Secundio, who died while stationed in Nijmegen. The inscription tells us that Secundio was from the Menapii tribe and that he was a cavalryman in the 9th. This tells us two important things. First, soldiers from outside Britain could serve in the legions. Second, lower-ranking soldiers were rarely remembered in stone. Sculptures like this one were almost always paid for by fellow soldiers, not by the state. And that's why the 9th Legion left so little behind. Their existence was recorded in paperwork, not in stone. And that paperwork disappeared after the early 2nd century. Thus, we are left with a half-remembered dream of a legion, a mosaic of personal items, a scattering of inscriptions, and an empty space where their deeds should be. At the end of the 2nd century, the historian Cassius Dio wrote of Rome's wild and unruly northern province, saying that no victory was final, no peace lasting. Then he added a telling detail. He said that this was partly because the province was thinly garrisoned, and we know that by this time, the 9th Legion was missing. So whatever happened to them, it was not a singular event. The province had been struggling for decades. If the 9th was lost to a natural disaster, disease, or some unforeseen calamity, the loss would have been keenly felt. If they were betrayed or wiped out by a native force, word might have gotten back to Rome, though we know that Romans sometimes preferred to ignore such defeats. And if they were reassigned, their absence would have been noted. If they were taken off the rolls, their numbers would have been distributed among other units. Whatever happened, we know that it wasn't easy to replace them. We know that because a different unit took their place. Rome solved many problems with infrastructure. They built roads, aqueducts, harbors, and defensive structures. But one of their greatest engineering projects was the Antonine Wall. Built in the early 3rd century, this structure ran from coast to coast across the narrowest point of the island. The wall crossed rivers, climbed mountains, and circumvented rough terrain. Much of the wall's path followed older tracks used by the locals. Like other frontier walls that Rome built around the empire, the Antonine Wall was designed to keep people in as much as it kept people out, and at first glance it appears to have replaced the work of the Ninth. The Ninth controlled the land, set up bases, built roads, and pacified the natives. The wall solidified that control, gave it permanence, and made it easier to defend. But the wall also implied a limit. It suggested that beyond this line, Rome did not go. It established a boundary between Roman and native. The wall probably took several years to complete. It cannot have been easy labor, and we know that a legion of about 5,000 men was assigned to build it. But we don't know if that legion was the Ninth, although it seems likely. The Ninth could have been reduced to half strength and then split in half, with one detachment sent to build the wall. The Ninth may have been guarding the wall while its builders were working, or maybe the wall was built as a memorial to the Ninth, a monument to their deeds. The records are frustratingly vague. By the end of the 2nd century, Caledonia was definitely a part of the province of Britannia. Rome's grip on the region was firm. The tribes had become clients. Local chiefs had Roman titles, and 2 walls, 1 turf and 1 stone, protected the settled areas from the north. Rome never pushed into Caledonia the way they had in other provinces. They didn't demand tribute. They didn't force local leaders to adopt Roman customs. They didn't even try to annex the region. They sort of adopted a hands-off approach, respecting the boundaries of tribal lands, allowing the natives to live largely as they had before, paying taxes and providing manpower, enough to maintain a distant stability and leave the heart of the province relatively alone. The mystery of the Ninth Legion is a mystery of absence. Their story is told not in what remains, but in what is missing. The lack of evidence is the evidence. They left no sculptures because they were low-ranking soldiers. They left no monuments because they were a forgotten unit. They left no record because they were casualties of war, disaster, or neglect. But even in their absence, they speak to us of a lost world, a place where Romans pushed and stopped, where they left their homeland and became something else. They remind us that some stories are better left untold. The telling diminishes them. Some moments are best left undisturbed. Some places are best left unexplored. What do you think happened to the Ninth Legion? You can write your theories in the comments section below. I hope you enjoy this video about how Roman senators actually lived. Thank you to my supporters for making videos like this possible. If you would like to support the channel, please see the links in the description. The idea of a Roman senator is often a caricature of a man in a toga, standing in a Roman forum, giving rousing speeches, easily identifiable by his distinctive white toga. But the reality of the lives of Roman senators was far more complex than what is portrayed in popular culture. So today, let us leave behind the uncertain mists of the northern frontier. The silence of vanished legions fades, replaced by the gentle murmur of fountains, the shuffle of sandals on marble, the rustle of linen togas through shaded halls. We return to the center, to Rome itself, but not to the noise of marketplaces or the grandeur of temples. Tonight, we step into the lives of Rome's elite, the senators. These were not warriors, not always. They were landowners, statesmen, orators, patrons, and their daily lives, though wrapped in dignity and law, were no less structured, no less burdened by the rhythms of power and performance. Imagine waking just before the sunrise, not to birdsong or natural light, but to the gentle footsteps of a household slave lighting the oil lamps in your atrium. The air is cool, the stone floors smooth beneath your feet. A cup of watered wine is offered. You rise slowly, the linen of your tunic fresh against your skin. A servant wraps your toga, a long, carefully folded garment, across your body. It takes time. The folds must be just so. Appearances matter. Outside, your domus, or town villa, is beginning to stir. Slaves fetch water, sweep the courtyard, prepare bread. In the small shrine near the entrance, a tiny flame flickers in honor of your household gods, the lairs. Your home is a place of status as much as comfort. Mosaic floors depict gods and battles. The walls are painted in shades of ochre and red, scenes of myth winding between ivy and geometric patterns. You pass under a portico into your peristyle garden, where trimmed box hedges frame pools of still water. Statues stand silently in alcoves, gazing eternally into nothing. Before the day begins in earnest, you receive your clients, the clients who rely on your patronage. They come to your home dressed in plain clothes, heads slightly bowed, waiting for a word of favor, a coin, or perhaps your intercession with a magistrate. This ritual, known as the salutatio, is not optional. It is a cornerstone of Roman social life. As a senator, your power is built as much on appearances and loyalty as it is on wealth. You give and they owe. You speak and they cheer. In return, they vote, or write, or wait in line again tomorrow. After this morning ritual, you make your way to the Curia Julia, the Senate House. You ride in a litter or walk, flanked by your slaves. The streets are loud, busy, filled with shouts in Latin and Greek, with sellers calling out the price of fish, the scent of fresh bread and human sweat mixing in the heat. Inside the Senate, things are quieter, but only just. The walls echo with debate. Speeches are made, proposals read, alliances formed in hushed whispers. It is not only your voice that matters, it is your timing, your posture, your audience. Senators do not rule alone, but their influence seeps into all aspects of life, through lawmaking, provincial oversight, military advisement, and economic networks. The day is long, but not without its indulgences. At midday, you retreat to your villa for a meal, perhaps reclining in a triclinium, the formal dining room. Dishes are served in courses: olives, salted fish, boiled eggs with garum, a rich, fermented fish sauce considered a delicacy, followed by roasted meats, lentils, sweet wine diluted with water, honeyed dates. The table is more than a place to eat. It is a stage for social display. You host guests, impress rivals, and cement alliances. Laughter is gentle, voice is measured, gestures deliberate. In the afternoon, you may take time for reading or dictation. Scrolls are unrolled slowly, works of Virgil, Cicero, or Greek philosophers. A slave reads aloud in a calm tone while you pace the shaded walkway of your garden. Your evening may involve attending a private convivium, a banquet hosted by another senator. Here, the meals are longer, the dishes more extravagant. Peacocks stuffed with herbs, dormice baked in honey, exotic fruits from Africa or the Levant. Harpists play softly in corners. Conversation drifts between poetry, law, politics, and the antics of Rome's ever-watching crowds. And yet, for all the elegance, there is pressure. A senator's wealth must be maintained. Land must be profitable. Tenants kept in line. Appearances must not slip. A scandal can ruin reputations. Proximity to power can shift with a single emperor's whim. One day, you are praised in the forum. The next, your name is struck from the Senate rolls. Many senators kept two homes, one in the city, one in the countryside. Their rural villas offered a retreat from politics, where olive trees swayed gently in the wind and farmhands worked beneath terracotta roofs. There, the pace of life slowed. The wine flowed more freely. The risk of insult or intrigue was lower. But even there, the expectations of status lingered. Guests must be entertained, statues erected, rituals performed. The life of a Roman senator was, in many ways, a performance, carefully curated, deeply structured, and always under watchful eyes. Now, let us paint a picture of a senator's country estate. Picture yourself approaching along a straight, well-made road lined by trimmed trees and bushes. After about a mile, you will come to a clearing. In front of you lies a courtyard framed by low stoa columns. On your right stands a two-story building with rooms opening onto a colonnaded porch. Straight ahead rises the main house, facing the courtyard with a symmetrical facade of white marble. Passing through the courtyard, you enter the atrium of the house, a square room open to the sky, planted with a tree and surrounded by colonnaded rooms. From here, you move into the peristyle, an enclosed garden court with a fountain and a pool. All around the garden are colonnaded rooms decorated with paintings and inlaid floors. Between the atrium and the peristyle is the tablinum, which serves as the center of domestic administration. Behind the tablinum is the triclinium for formal dining. Beyond this area is the library, followed by the bedrooms, each with a connecting bathroom. The villa has guest rooms, farm offices, and storage rooms. And behind the main house lie the quarters for the slaves and a stable for the horses. There is also a place for sacrificial activity away from the main residence, a farm with outbuildings, storehouses, and living quarters for permanent laborers, and a theater cut into the hillside. Finally, running along the crest of the hill is a road connecting to other farms and villas belonging to friends and relatives. But what did a senator's day look like? There is no set answer to this question, as a senator's daily schedule would vary depending on the time of year, whether he was on vacation, whether there were any important meetings or events scheduled, and a variety of other factors. However, scholars can piece together a general picture based on the writings of Roman authors such as Pliny the Younger, Cicero, and Quintilian. At dawn, a senator would wake up and begin the process of getting dressed, typically starting with a linen undergarment called a subligaculum, followed by a tunic, a long, loose outer robe, and finally a toga, a large rectangular piece of fabric draped over the left shoulder. After dressing, he would wash himself, shave, and offer sacrifice to the gods. He might then join his family for breakfast, after which he would depart for the city. Once in Rome, he would first attend to his private business, such as managing his estates or meeting with clients. He would then proceed to the forum, where he might attend a public hearing or engage in political debate. Throughout the day, he would continue his public duties, which could include delivering a speech in the Senate, presiding over a legal case, or visiting a friend. In the late afternoon, he might return home to rest before joining a friend or relative for dinner, after which he could attend a theatrical performance or a public event. His evening might end with a visit to a bathhouse, followed by a leisurely stroll through the city. In conclusion, the life of a Roman senator was not merely about power and privilege. It was a life of strict rituals, traditions, and etiquette. Theirs was a world of performances, both public and private, where every action was observed and every decision had far-reaching consequences. Their days were meticulously structured, balancing public duties with private life. They were masters of their household and of their own narrative, shaping their image to maintain their status and power. While history remembers them as influential figures, it is essential to recognize the complexities and constraints of their existence. For within the marble halls and manicured gardens, they were not just lawmakers and statesmen, but men striving to uphold an image, preserve a legacy, and navigate the intricate dance of Roman elite. And with that, we bring this episode to a close. I hope you enjoyed learning about how Roman senators actually lived. What aspects of their daily lives surprised you the most? Please let me know in the comments below. And if you would like to learn more about ancient Rome, please consider subscribing to my channel. I would love to have you back for the next video. Thank you to my supporters for making videos like this possible. Please see the links in the description if you would like to support the channel. Until the next video, remember, Rome was never a dull place. And now, as the fires of ancient Rome burn low in our minds, and the sound of sandals on stone fades to silence, we leave behind the dusty fields of the tenant farmer, the shadowed halls of emperors, the northern mist where a legion vanished, and the candlelit villas of Rome's elite. The world we've wandered tonight is long gone. The streets are ruins. The voices are echoes. But the lives, Those ordinary, extraordinary lives remain quietly stitched into the fabric of history. They worked under the sun, labored in debt, laughed in courtyards, feared the knock of authority or the judgment of gods. They wrote, ruled, marched, pleaded, feasted, and eventually faded into time. And you have walked beside them. You felt the rough soil beneath your hands. You smelled the incense curling through the atrium. You listened to Latin debates in a marble hall or the hush of fog over Hadrian's wall. History is not just dates or monuments. It is the rhythm of breath in a sleeping villa, the clatter of a wooden cart on a distant road, the slow flicker of lamplight in the home of a senator, or a tenant's wooden shack. And now, your own day nears its quiet close. Here, in your present moment, you are safe. You are still. No taxes loom, no emperor's decree, no legion's march. Only the softness of your bed, the quiet of your room, and the steady beat of your heart. Peaceful, slow, and timeless. Let it slow even more. Let your thoughts drift gently, like ashes from a Roman brazier, carried upward by the night air. No need to chase them. Just let them rise. Sleep, like history, doesn't ask to be controlled. It arrives gently. It settles slowly. And it carries you somewhere just beyond memory. Thank you for walking this journey through ancient Rome. May your rest be deep, and your dreams quiet. Good night.